Peebles family, part 2.
You guys must be very brave and very desperate for presenters to invite me back.
Oh my goodness.
Here I
That
am.
was only because it was good.
Okay. And Arthur's not going to be here either, again, so you're just stuck with me. He's on a business trip, I think he plans it this way. So I get to be the only one on this one, but there's a lot of help from him as well. Today I'm going to do the part 2, Next Generation of the Peebles family. You will hear how the Peebles family, not unlike many other families, how they adapted to the rapidly changing times, and how some of the various factors affected them. And what I've listed up here are some factors that was going on at that time that really influenced people. I call influencers. So when I'm talking, you'll hear some of the things about how certain family members got affected by many of these factors. So I'll just put these up so you can kind of keep it a look eye on. So last time in February, I did the part 1, and I spoke mostly, probably in great detail, some of you guys, about Thomas and Elizabeth Peebles, the original family that bought and settled property down by the Hudson River, down in what's now Halfmoon. It was not quite Halfmoon at that point in time, but it was the area. They had vast holdings of land down there. It is down by, as you were saying, it's down by 432 Hudson River Road. So I spoke a lot about Thomas and Elizabeth and their children. I will recap a little bit of that in case somebody wasn't here for that, but the main focus for today is going to be highlighting some of the grandchildren. And I just picked out some of the grandchildren, mostly from what the information I got or can find. Sometimes it's difficult to find some of everything, and as you can imagine, it's particularly harder to find things about the women, the females, because they were as spoken about or written about, but I do have a little bit about some of the granddaughters. So the biggest focus will be on the grandchildren, highlight some of them. In case you're interested, I think at some point in time in the winter, I'm going to be redoing the part 1 presentation and presenting it to the Waterford Museum and Cultural Center Historical Society. So I will let Linda know the details on that in case somebody wants to go down and get a redo of it. Undoubtedly, I have updated some of the slides and found more information, so you can get a rehistory on that. So like I said, I'm not going to do a lot of details on this because we talked about it in the first presentation, but the Peebles were Thomas and Elizabeth Grant. I listed both kind of spellings that you see in the history books, with the D or with the T. They were obviously settled in this area in the mid-1700s. Thomas was Scottish. His family was one of the founding 12 families of this general area, and he was lucky enough to have talent, and he managed thousands and thousands of acres of land. So this family was fortunate in the fact that they had some means. Elizabeth came from a fairly long lineage of historic Albanian families from the mid-1600s to the 1700s. Her maternal grandparents were Knecks and Van Schacks. Her grandfather and uncles were very famed silversmiths in Albany. And here's an example, one of the very few rare silver tankards. It's about this big, nice silver tankard that is at the Albany Institute of History and Art. So if you ever go down there, take a look at that tankard. That is her grandparents and uncles. So she came from a pretty prominent family with some means. Now, Thomas died fairly young, left Elizabeth as a widow. and I talked in great detail about that. But when he died, passed away, they buried him on the property, so he is on the property that I own right now, with the family plot. So there's a number of folks buried there, he being one of the top ones. Okay. So they ended up having 5 children that I can find. I don't know if there's any ones that died earlier, but there's 5 children. Hugh, Maria, Rosanna, Garrett, and Gertrude. You'll see all the different spellings. It's the female version of Garrett. Gertrude. As you can tell, through various ages here. Thomas passed away, as I said, fairly early. Hugh was the eldest. He stepped up to the plate, but the Revolutionary War broke out. He was about 15, 16 years old at the time. He went to serve in the Revolutionary War. Was part of the Burgoyne campaign up in Saratoga. He ended up being a private secretary and quartermaster for Lord Stirling, Williams Alexander, a very famous local war general. Okay, now just for your, we're going through, I'm just going to leave this up here so you can see where all the different family members. So Thomas, Elizabeth, Hugh, Maria, Rosanna, Garrett, and Gertrude. So Hugh married, as typical, first married a woman named Abigail Surratt. Remember this name, okay? She was actually from Rhode Island, and I hadn't figured out where they got the connection with Rhode Island, but there was obviously some kind of connection with Rhode Island. Abby, or something, she was often called Abby. I've seen some of her writings where she talks about arduous traveling. I mean, it just took so long to go anywhere or back, you know, in the late 1700s. She talked about going to, how long it took for her to get to Albany to Newport, Rhode Island. It took 21 days to get from Albany to Newport, Rhode Island. I came over this afternoon from Boston. It took me 3 hours and 15 minutes, 80 miles per hour on the Mass Pike. So, you know, what the difference between now and then, it's amazing. I do not know if they had any children or if they had any stillborns. I don't see anybody buried in a family plot of that. Abby herself is buried on the family plot. So she dies fairly young. Not untypical. Hugh eventually remarries. Everybody ends up remarrying. You can't be, you know, you need lots of people. You need a community to live in this rough time period. So everybody tended to remarry. So he remarries a woman named Lydia Stevenson, and they end up having 5 children. 1 son and 4 daughters. Thomas, obviously named after his grandfather, who passed away, Hugh's father, who passed away, somehow goes to Philadelphia. So he flies the coop. I haven't quite figured out why. Did he go there on his own to make his own mark, you know, to stand himself out from his father, or did the family send him out there for some business purposes? But he goes out there to Philadelphia and ends up dying there at age 27. So their only son dies. And I don't know if he was ever married or had any children. I don't see any evidence of that. He has the 4 daughters. I'm going to talk, 1 daughter dies fairly young. And you'll see this year, the 1811 year, keep that in your head, because that was a very bad year for the Peebles. They had a lot of deaths, a lot of misfortunes around that time period, 1811. Hit them really hard. So one of their daughters on the list, she's buried on the property too. She lived only one year and a couple months. Then their youngest one, which is interesting because typically, not unusual, I should say, not typically, but not unusual for a family that has a lot of children. This is 5, but it wasn't uncommon that the youngest daughters often did not marry. Their often role in the family was to take care of the parents. So you'll see a lot of families where the women didn't marry and you wonder how come, you know, especially because probably everybody needed a spouse, you know. They often was there to take care of the parents. and never married. Okay? But Catherine did. Now, Catherine Dorr Peebles, born in 1814. Ooh, oh, sorry. Ooh, there we go. She's the granddaughter. Hey, Catherine Dorr Peebles. She does marry James McMurray Austin. He's an MD. He's a physician. He actually was a physician in Waterford. So they actually lived in the Waterford area. And I don't know quite how the lines at that point in time, because it was a village, it was a town, everything was kind of expanding. But he was a physician, a medical physician. He actually graduated from Union College. So one of the kind of a prominent. Catherine Dorr Peebles. Dorr was her middle name. She was actually named, her father named her for Lady Kitty Catherine Alexander Dorr, okay, who was the wife of a very famous revolutionist, William Dorr. I could give you a whole lecture on that. But William, so she was the wife of William Dorr, very, very famous, very, very wealthy person. So she was Catherine Alexander Dorr. Now, she was actually a birth Alexander. She was the daughter of Lord Stirling, William Alexander. Remember I talked about how Hugh, her father, was a secretary for Lord Stirling. This is his daughter. So somewhere they have met, undoubtedly, in all the connections. He was either so admired by her or thought so greatly of the family that he turned around and named his daughter Catherine Dorr. They had 2 children, and I just found this one last night. It's like one of those things where you're like, where did she, why have not I been able, why did I not find her? Okay, she's not buried on the property for one reason, and it just, every once in a while you have to put in numbers and names and something new will pop up. DAR is great. DAR is a live lineage that they release, and I found information about her. So they had 2 children. I don't know dates and times on that, so I'll get that eventually. But they have a daughter, Frances, who marries a Tinbrook. Okay, nice, good, Dutch name. Okay. They're in, she was born here in Waterford, obviously, and is someplace in Albany is what I found. And they have a son, James, named after. Now, James himself, I said he was a physician, but he's a grandson of Robert McMurray, okay, who was also at the Burgoyne campaign. Much older, so he's the grandson, but age back then, the people who were in the Revolutionary War, they were 15, 16-year-olds all the way up to anybody who could carry a gun. So, you interacted with a lot of different people. So he came in, he was actually, Robert McMurray was actually born in Ireland, came over here, got drafted, got told to fight. He ends up at Saratoga, Bemis Heights, and he basically stays here. He dies in Salem. So James is the grandson of that. They have 2 children, like I said. Catherine dies rather young, not too long after her son. So little baby James dies fairly early. This is all during a time of the cholera epidemic, so we're talking about things that are happening. Death is a big thing. Death changes a lot of stuff. Death was prominent all the time. Death is always, but more so. People had a very low mortality. Epidemics went through. In the 1830s to the 1866, cholera came through in waves. And there's indication that both the son and Catherine may have succumbed to one of those epidemics that went through. And how awful must that be to have a doctor, your husband, a doctor, a medical MD, not being able to save your wife and child. He eventually, James McMurray Austin, actually was quite prominent in the Freemasonry, which was becoming very prominent in this area. That's part of the societies and groups, people that help each other, people have a common interest, and it's helping with businesses. He was very much into the masonry. He was actually the first master of the Waterford Lodge when the Waterford Lodge first opened up. He was their first master. After his wife and son die, a few years later, he moves down to New York City and actually becomes extremely prominent in what we call the Grand Lodge in New York State. He was a secretary for many, many years. And in New York City, there's actually a monument erected to him. That prominent, okay. So that's highlighting a few of the grandchildren on Hugh's side. So I'm going to figure out. Okay, so second child, Maria. Okay. She's born in Halfmoon. I don't know when she dies. I have not been able to find her gravesite. It is just irking me to no belief that I can't find her because I find everybody else in this line. Okay? She's the second one. She marries Abraham Livingston, who is a captain in the Revolutionary War. He was part of the Canadian regiment. He served under his brother, who was the colonel, and he served with his other brother. Came a long line of Livingstons that were fur traders. They moved up and down upstate New York, and Canada. I mean, it was just a big territory. They did weather tours. He actually was born in Canada, unlike some of his other siblings. His mother, Catherine, was a daughter of General Temple. So you got all these names, right? So he comes down. He is a captain when they marry. And they end up having a lot of children here, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, okay? Most of them actually survive. Angela dies as an infant. Thomas lives to be about 9 and drowns. Okay. But they have a lot of other children. I think her and her sister were on their own personal campaign to populate Stillwater because they ended up staying. So after the war, Abraham Livingston and the family actually stays right near the battlefield and stays in the whole Stillwater area. You can see some of the names, you know, a lot of times they actually use the middle names as their official name. So you see Peebles often is used as an official middle name. So it's honoring her side of the family. Okay. So Elizabeth, the eldest, ends up marrying a postmaster from Troy, Rose Hubbard. He was also a registered county clerk. So, you know, dealing with the real trades, the government, she dies fairly young, okay, without any children, unfortunately. Catherine Livingston marries Samuel Mathers, who comes from Connecticut. You see a lot of Connecticut influence here. And they eventually relocate to Connecticut. I'll talk about Rosanna later. John Peebles is listed as John Peebles Livingston. He's a captain. He ends up being a captain in the War of 1812. So war takes him away. He does come back. Maria, obviously named after her mother, marries James O'Donnell, and they have 3 children, and they basically stay in the Stillwater area. Janet, and I will talk a little bit about Janet. Okay, Janet, Jane. If you see me have it slash, it's because you see there are various different iterations of what they call it. So, Rosanna. I'm going to talk about Rosanna first. So Rosanna Peebles, her middle name is Peebles, marries in 1845 Philip P. Schuyler. There's lots of Schuylers, right? So where does he fit in the Schuyler scheme of deals? Okay. He is the son of the U.S. Congressman Philip Jeremiah Schuyler. Okay, his first wife. His aunts are the Schuyler sisters. So the big nice exhibit that's going on now at the Albany Institute of History and Art, who's showcasing the Schuyler sisters, one of which is Elizabeth Hamilton. Okay, he's the second one of the sisters. That's his aunt. Okay. His father, Philip Jeremiah, is their brother. So undoubtedly, there was a lot of influence with the Schuyler's. They obviously interacted with all of the family, knew the people very well. They get married. They go back and forth from Rhinebeck. They do have one child, which is very confusing because they named Livingston Schuyler. There's so many, there's Schuyler, Livingston, Livingston Schuyler. They go back and forth. It drives you absolutely crazy when you go through looking at all the history because all I ever get is Schuyler, Livingston. It's no, that's not him, it's the other one. Okay? And he's buried in Stillwater as well as his mother. Very confusing. I get a lot of, I have data, a lot of data, and it's split in two ways. Half of the data says Philip dies fairly young at like 33 in 1822. The other one says he lives to 1875, no man. Okay? It makes a big difference in how he thinks because, you know, I can understand if he dies young, and they only have one child, that's why they only have one child, it kind of makes more sense to me. He's supposedly buried in Rhinebeck, so one of these days when I have nothing else to do, I'll drive down to Rhinebeck and see if I can find his actual gravestone, because I have not seen any pictures of it to see if I can actually verify what it is. Now, he comes from a very prominent family, and I can't find too much about him. Can't find too much about him. I can't find too much about the great-grandson. I don't know, it's one of those things where you come from such a prominent family that are you living off your parents' wealth and you don't have to do anything? Or, you know, the family is so prominent, so many other people that you get overshadowed by it. You know, so nobody pays attention to you because they're interested in, you know, Hamilton and, you know, fancy parties and everything else. So I really don't know much about him. I'm hoping to find out more about what their lifestyle was like. You know, did they stay in Stillwater? What did he do? What was their lifestyle like? It's always a continual research. So it's one of those where I think he's influenced by, there's so much, he's in the shadows of his very famous aunts and cousins and uncles and great-parents. So that's Rosanna, that's one of them. I keep doing that, sorry. Jane, so I said I was going to talk about, okay, so we're going to talk about Jane Van der Heyden, so another good Dutch name. Love it. Okay. Now she marries Edwin Williams. He was originally from Connecticut, okay, so you know, we have lots of Connecticut's. She actually gets married at her home of her sister. Okay. So I said her sister Mathers. Okay. They relocate to Middletown, Connecticut. See that? So there's was her husband somehow related to Edward Williams? Probably. There's obviously a connection. Okay. But she marries Edwin down in Connecticut at her home of her sisters and brother-in-laws. And she's officiated by the Reverend Dr. Knott. Okay? Marries them. Keep that one in mind, okay? They, okay, end up having a slew of children. They actually stayed in Stillwater for quite a bit before they ended up eventually going back to Connecticut. Again, they're helping the population expansion of Stillwater. They have a number of children, okay? I'm not going to talk much about all of them, but what I do want to say is if you look, both parents die relatively within a year and a half, 2 years of each other. Okay? The big span of age here, I don't have all the dates on this, but basically, when they pass away, the four sons, 1, 2, 3, 4, from Hugh Welch down, are still young. They're still very young. So here's we got death. This case, it's both parents died fairly young. If they lived longer, they probably would have had about 15 children. But they die in their mid-40s. So what happens to the children? Okay, so the four sons, Hugh, obviously named after grandparents, Hugh, John, Charles, and Frederick, actually are raised by Helen, by your sister. So So she takes the 4 sons and raises them. Okay. The last, little Mary, she's barely a toddler. Okay, everything I hear says she was a child, she was tiny, she was an infant. She's adopted by her aunt, Catherine Mathers, in Connecticut. Okay, obviously there's a connection between the Williams. So so her aunt, Catherine, basically takes her and adopts her, raises her from a baby. And you will see a lot of times it's Mary Livingston Williams Mather, so they actually sometimes put the Mather's name on the end of her name. So she considers herself a Williams, she also considers herself a Mather, because she's basically raised by her aunt. So this is what happens to a family that death hits. What do you do with the family? What do you do with all the young children? What do you do? Family steps forward. The sister raises half of them, an aunt raises another. And then, yes, okay, good, okay. So now, I'm going to move along and talk about the 3rd child of Thomas and Elizabeth, named Rosanna. And you see that name is used. You see Maria and Rosanna are kind of interchanged. Both sisters, and everybody tends to name their children after their aunts and uncles and their sisters and brothers. Okay. No Theas. So the 3rd child, Rosanna, she ends up marrying a gentleman named John Welch, who was a member, also from Connecticut, of the Colonel's Dragoons, and was part of the Burgoyne campaign. So you hear a lot of this, part of the Burgoyne campaign. So what's happened during Revolutionary War, a lot of people got put into these campaigns or dragoons or groups of infantrymen, and they're shipped up, sent to here, sent to there. And a lot of times, they'll come up to an area, they're young, that's where they're going to find their mate, they're here for a while, or half the time they stay for a while after the war. So you got a lot of people that are moved from where they generally live, probably something that they would never have done on their own, but because the war came out and they were sent up for this battle, or sent back to that battle, sent through that battle, they were all over the place, places that they'd never been to before. So he is up here as part of the campaign, obviously knows probably some of the other campaign members or military people, and he meets Rosanna and they end up getting married. They eventually relocate to Litchfield, Connecticut, which is where his family is originally from. Now they have 2 children. William, the first child, William, I don't think he lived past, I don't think he lived a year. His birth and baptism is recorded at the Dutch Reformed Church of Scotland. Almost all of these families members were married at, with the exception of a couple other folks, but many of them were at the Dutch Reformed Church in Scotland, which is very great because they have great records. But he dies fairly young. Okay. A few years later, they have another son. They also named William, to reuse the name, okay? William Henry Welch. That's a picture of him. He ends up being a Yale graduate. Very nice. In law. Eventually, with expansion of the territory, he moves to Michigan, then to Minnesota, which was a territory, where he was elected as a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He was appointed. He had 2 terms there. He was appointed by President Pierce personally, and he was appointed by Buchanan. After that, the Michigan territory actually became a state. So the presidents did not appoint them after that point. It was, by the local government. He moves to Red Wing, Minnesota, when it becomes a state. And he marries Henrietta, and they have 7 children of their own. And one of the youngest son is named Garrett Peebles. That's his official name, right after his uncle. Now, of the 7 children, most of them stay in the Minnesota territory. So you got the expansion. All of a sudden now you got families moving away. They're moving with, as the expansion territory goes out, they're finding their way out. Abraham, the second son, actually is in the Civil War. He dies of his wounds in the Civil War. And the township in Minnesota names the township after him. So the Welch Township in Michigan is named after Abraham Welch for his service in the Civil War. Okay. Fourth child is Garrett. You just heard, you saw he was named, one of his nephews were named after him. And the fourth son is Garrett. So, fourth child of Thomas and Elizabeth. He was still a little bit too young when the Revolutionary War came out to actually be of any service in that. He stayed home and helped with his mother. He was just a little bit underage for that. He first marries Eliza Surratt. Remember that name? Surratt? Okay. Sister of his brother's first wife from Rhode Island. Okay, so two brothers married two sisters. She unfortunately also does not live very long. She dies in 1811, that dreaded 1811 in that family. Okay. And is buried her gravestone is on the Peebles family plot. They don't send her back to her when she's here. They do have a number of children. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Charles, the youngest, dies also 1811, same time as his mother dies. Okay. So very bad year for the Peebles altogether, both brothers. I don't know too much about all of these. I'm not going to talk about much of their children here. Hugh Surratt, so named after his mother, does end up being recorded as dying in Arkansas. So I'm not sure why the first son, he names after his brother, Hugh. Why Hugh is sent out, goes to Arkansas. Again, is it on for his own accord? He wants to make a name for himself, or why? But he ends up dying in Arkansas at around 30. So both of the first sons of both brothers die 27, 30 years old elsewhere. Garrett eventually marries Maria Van Schack. And here's a nice picture of Maria Van Schack. That's at the Albany Institute of History and Art. She was actually thought to be quite pretty at that time. Very lovely. Comes from a prominent family, the Van Schacks, of the Lansingburg, Troy area. Haverhill. Once Garrett marries with Maria Van Schack, he's really been prompted into a very prominent Dutch family. Some of the other ones are pretty prominent, but they've got some substance. They do end up having 2 children, of which Anna only lives to be about 10 years old. And she's buried at the Van Schack family plot down in Ransford area, down there by the Van Schack homes. And the youngest one is Anthony Augustus Peebles. I'm going to talk about Anthony next, okay? Okay, there's Anthony. Anthony Augustus Peebles. There's a lot of literature about him, so I can talk a lot about him, but we'll just do kind of a brief. He's a grandson. He is a grandson. He lives a pretty good age. He is raised in, by this time now, his father has actually gone to Lansingburg village itself. It's gotten, all the villages are starting to increase and multiply, and it's an official village. He's raised in Lansingburg village. He attends the academy, Lansingburg Academy, okay, which his uncles helped found, okay, earlier on. Okay. And he goes to finishing school in Stockbridge, Mass. So that's, that's kind of a big deal to be going out elsewhere to one of the very famous finishing schools in Stockbridge, Mass. I used to live in that area, so I had to put that in there. Now his mother, Maria, okay? Maria Van Schack, is actually a cousin and is very close to her cousin Maria Gainsborough, who marries a Melville. Okay? Maria Melville is the mother of the famous author Herman Melville and his brothers and sisters. So there's that connection. So there's everybody finding it's connected, okay? And the Peebles helped the Melville family beginning around 1838. Okay? What's happening around 1838? We have the Panic of 1837. Actually started around 36. Okay? A huge financial crisis. Okay? Part of it was President Jackson doing, part of it was influence from Great Britain, but inflation flew up to the roof, unemployment sky high, a lot of people lost a lot of money, lost everything. Everybody was hurting. The Melville family was not particularly wealthy to start with. They had been in New York City, they then moved into Albany, but when the finances hit really hard, it hit their family really hard, they moved to Lansingburg to be close to her family because it was cheaper rent. They got out of Albany. So they rented a place in Lansingburg, and they ended up actually from the, got a lot of financial help as well as other influence and advice from their families, and particularly the Peebles. You'll hear that. Now, in the early 1840s, Anthony was actually engaged to one of Herman Melville's sister, Augusta. Kind of hard. Anthony Augustus and Augusta. So he was actually engaged to her for quite a bit, and when actually helped Herman Melville got married, and of course Anthony was invited to the wedding. He was there as her fiancé, her sister's fiancé. Somewhere, however, after a few years, that engagement breaks off. I don't know why, but it breaks off. There's a lot of information about all that interaction with Herman Melville's family, the Melvilles and Anthony. There's a lot of things written by the Melvilles. They actually ridicule Anthony when he's a younger man. They call him, I put this down, his lordship. And stuff like that, his lordship. Because he was fairly wealthy, okay? He was going to inherit a lot of money and prestige. Was part of it, they talk about him being very arrogant, okay? Maybe it was a little bit because they were a little jealous, I don't know. So there was a little bit of a tension between them, although they kept in his good graces. Eventually, at the end, if he was arrogant, he outgrew it. And everything you hear about when he matures as a very nicely, very respectful man. But in the earlier years, they kind of made fun of Anthony. He does inherit the Peebles Island, because when Maria Van Schack's family owned Haver Island, or Old Island, which is now called Peebles Island, okay? That's why. Okay? So when his parents pass away, he inherits the island, and he manages his businesses and all the activities. There's houses there and everything. They basically own it, so he manages that. Okay? He also becomes very civic-minded. He also becomes in politics. He's a director of both several different banks, Troy's People's Bank and Waterford Saratoga County Bank. So he's very well respected to be considered a director of that. In a little article I read about the elite, the economic elite of Rensselaer County in 1860. They actually had a list of who was prominent and who was wealthy. Anthony Peebles is listed as occupation as a gentleman. Okay, so he didn't have to have a trade per se. Okay, and he was having a worth of $31,000, which was staggering back then. He does eventually, after this engagement breaks off, and he gets, he inherits the island, which he had been helping managing for his mother anyway all along. But when she passes away, now he's got sole responsibility of it, so puts his focus on that. But he does eventually marry a woman named Mary Louise Parmalee of the Lansingburg area. He marries her in 1862. They have 2 children, which neither one of them live beyond small children. He also serves 2 terms as a supervisor for the town of Lansingburg. And in everything I write up, he's known as a breeder of very fine horses. So he must have had really interesting horses. So yeah, it was an interesting character. So I just give some highlights of Anthony. And then switch over to Mary Louise Parmalee, okay, his wife. She outlives him for about 10 years. She is a daughter of a local lawyer named Elias Parmalee. He's also educated. And he's a descendant, and she is a descendant of the Bradfords, Plymouth Colony. So she's got one of those direct lineage. Her father, he's everywhere. Elias Parmalee. He is the Lansingburg and Troy and Waterford. He's right there with everybody. Okay, he's stepping his foot in. He's expanding. Okay. He also becomes a trustee of the new Co-Host Manufacturing Company. Okay, along with Garrett Peebles. Okay, so at the same time when Co-Host Manufacturing started, Garrett and Elias were trustees. So somewhere along the line, the 2 parents, 2 fathers introduced the 2 children, and they ended up marrying. Interesting enough as well, her aunt, Mary Ellen Parmalee, was an early love interest of Herman Melville. So they're all like interrelated. Okay. Mary Louise is educated at the academy. And as I said, they had 2 sons that both died young. Now, I don't know if it's because she wanted to do something with the pain of losing 2 children. I'm not sure. But she actually becomes an author of children's books. And she goes under the name of Lindy Palmer. That's her pseudonym. She, over a period of about 20 years, she writes these books for children. At least, I think there's at least 30 of them. I'm not sure, there's a long list of them. The first one is published 1861. And you can still get them. I have some of them here. Okay. Someday I'll be able to find a real first edition. So they actually are reprinted. As you can imagine, at that time, the first one she writes is The Little Captain, which is The Little Captain, A Temperance Tale. Okay, so you know what's going on at that time. Very interesting. And a number of collections, of different books. The Honor Book Club, Helps Over Hard Places. So all the kind of things. A lot of the writing is about what she sees in the area, in her own way. John Jack, and and one of them is just kind of. She talks about this one where the two children are complaining because their father wants the boy to pull weeds, and the young daughter is supposed to shell peas. And both kids are like, I don't want to do that, my parents are so unfair to me. And then they start dreaming about, well, they're princes and prince. If I was a prince and a princess, I would have to do this. And then a neighbor says, well, princes and princesses also have problems because, everybody wants their money, or there's tales about how young prince and princesses are killed and blah, 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 that kind of thing. So at the very end, in her book, she goes, a little boy says, well, all princes are not smothered in their beds, though. And the neighbor says, no, overhearing the children, but they all have their troubles soon or late, just as surely as the little farmers. There is no escape. Let us learn, dear children, in whatever state we are, therewith to be content. End of story. Okay? So this is the kind of the morale type of stories, and little kids, because your parents ask you to help, they do it for a reason, and, So very interesting. Now, so she's got kind of the means of her own. She inherits Haverhill Island, obviously, okay. She's an author. I don't know if she made any money in it, but she obviously wrote books for 20 years. When she becomes widowed, when Anthony dies, like I said, she lives for like 10 years later, she sells the island to Clewett Peabody Company, and that's how they got Peebles Island and did the manufacturing there. So she sells to them. Now, interestingly enough, they didn't have any children, so there's nobody to pass things on. And she knows that her husband and her grandfather-in-law had a lot of family information, family books, maps, things like that. She donates a lot of them. She donates a lot of the maps down to someplace in New York City. She also donates a lot of family items to the Lobby Institute of History and Art. Okay, of which right here is a pair of silk shoes that Anthony's grandmother, Anna Van Schack, in 1775 wore on her wedding day. Those are some items that she gave to the Lobby Institute. Right now, this is one of the items showcased in the Schuyler Sisters exhibit that's down there. So if you go there and see the exhibit, we have different things about typical clothing and things that the sisters back then, that era was. You'll see these little, and about this tiny. Oh my God, I don't know if they found their feet. I mean, my feet, I can't even get my toes in them. But you know, but she donates many different items, and if you look over about, you'll see. So some of the pictures that earlier, when I said the picture of Maria Van Schack, she donated that to the Lobby Institute. So she had all these items. Okay, and last but not least is the fifth child, Gertrude, Group C. Okay, female version of Karen. She actually was the youngest of all of them. She, for the longest time, helped her mother run the business and take care of the household. But she eventually marries. She marries in 1793 a man named Benjamin Tibbets. He was originally from Rhode Island. There's that Rhode Island again. But he is a fairly prominent merchant in Lansingburg. He comes from a very big family, eventually a big family in Lansingburg and Troy, called the Tibbets family. He is a younger brother of George Tibbets. They actually had a store there. They were everywhere. George Tibbets became the mayor of Troy, a very prominent person in Troy, in the history of Lansingburg and Troy. Benjamin, in his short life, because he does not live very long, okay, did a lot of things. So he was a trustee of a lot of different things. So he helped, along with a number of other people, a lot of them Peebles, Hugh and Garrett. But Benjamin and his brothers, George, helped found or make the library in Troy. The academy, I said the academy, the Lansingburg Academy, that was one of them. They helped start that. They were really big in transportation, looking for bridge work. They wanted to make sure they had bridges that was not going to limit use of the waterway by boats. Even paving streets. I mean, he was everywhere. He was part of the banks. He was part of everything. Okay. Now, when I talk about the bridge company, the families got together and they were doing sawmills up in Fort Miller in anticipation of bridges. Well, the bridges were bridges. Okay. He ends up dying in Fort Miller. So I don't know if there's an accident or something, but he obviously was up there on family business, and he dies very young. They do, Gertrude and Benjamin do have a son. They named him Benjamin Thomas Peebles. Okay? Like that name, Thomas Peebles. Okay? So now she's a widow with a child. The Tibbets family obviously stays connected with her, even though she is now a widow. She's a daughter-in-law. She's not a daughter, but they do keep tabs of her and help influence her. Okay. Eventually, she marries the second wife of Eliphalet Nutt. okay? When she marries him, he is already the president of Union College. He's also served as part-time president of RPI as well, okay? Which brings him back and forth. He would stay in Union, but when RPI started up, he would come there for like 2 or 3 days a week. So he was traveling back and forth. So that gets him into Troy Lansingburg. Because of course he's going to meet all the other prominent people. So somehow he meets Gertrude and they get married. Now he is a widow. His first wife, they have 3 children. She dies fairly young. When she dies, Sarah is like maybe 2, 3, 4 years old and gets shipped off. He is originally from Connecticut as well. They ship off Sarah to be helped raised by a family member there, but poor little Sarah keeps writing to her father, "Can I come see you? And he finally breaks down and says, "I gotta have my family be united." So he's obviously looking for a woman who's going to raise his children, okay? So typical, remarriages, raising families, it's all, it's not common, people die. So the mixed families or the interrelationships of families there, it's not that you're divorced and this and that. It's like, well, who can I help? And, so he gets Gertrude and she raises his 3 children as well as her from the firstborn, okay? And then they themselves have another son, Howard, okay? So and when you see some of the paperwork, I don't know if they adopt or what, but it's just very common. Benjamin is often, referred to as Eliphalet's sons, Benjamin and Howard. He's often thrown the not name at the end. Did he legally adopt him? I don't know. But that's how people did. He had mixed families. We can talk a lot about Eliphalet, but he's very famous. One of the big things is he's a minister by trade, quite the scientist, quite the inventor, president of RPI, long-term 60 years president of Union College. Okay, he got catapulted into the public eye, big public eye, when he gave a huge sermon in 1804 after Hamilton and Aaron Burr duel. He gave his sermon on the death of Hamilton. It was well received. It got printed in all kinds of newspapers, and he also became a very public person. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Benjamin and his brother. Okay, so the grandsons, Benjamin Tibbets and Howard Knott. Okay. So their father, Eliphalet, is quite the inventor. He owns a lot of patents on thermal to steam engines. He's really into engines. He's really into the heat transfer. Okay. He has got a patent on a very popular parlor stove, okay, called the Knott stove. Now, as you know, this area was really big into making castings for iron stoves. Okay, you have 2 right here. Okay, right over there on the side. This was a bulging business in the Albany-Troy capital region, Albany-Troy, Lansingburg, Schenectady. Huge business, okay? You actually now have stoves that go in the parlor heat. Not only that, but they're making boiler stoves for steam, okay? So, Eliphalet has his invention. He's also a businessman. He's like, here's every little thing, okay? He sets up his 2 sons, the 2 brothers, to manage the operations of the business. Okay? They developed this business. The H. Knott and Company, sometimes called the Howard Knott and Company, the 2 brothers manages that. Okay? They're first established in Albany in 1826, and they're often called the Union Furnace, because they're the powerhouse of this. They actually said of the 5 top foundries in the Albany area, they're predominantly the number 1, the top. They produce 1,000 tons annually of castings. The next one underneath was like 250, also huge. And they were also considered the most prominent preference of stoves. And they shipped them everywhere. I mean, they were not just locally, they shipped them to Europe. They were that well known. Eventually, the business moves to Manhattan. They actually have a spot on Water Street in Manhattan, partly because their father wants to expand to make boilers for ships, steam boiler furnaces to make steam for ships. He actually has his own ship built, okay, which he called the Novelty, to which he used to showcase his new steams. He practiced the steams. And they went back and forth from New York, that Novelty ship went back and forth from Albany and New York City, as they were making some parts here and moving it to New York City and then shipping them out. Okay? They were, so you can see them listed in 1930s. Now here is one of the parlor stoves. Okay, it is an example of one of the largest. It stands about this high. It's designed by Halfmoon, made in Water Street, New York. So obviously it was made down there. This was also at the Art Institute of Albany Institute of Art and History. Just recently they had an exhibit called Heavy Metal, all about the stoves and the stove business, and several of the knot stoves are listed there, and that's an example of really very tall, very lovely. Now, they moved to Manhattan in 1830s. What happens? They end up losing control of the business because they also get hit by the financial crisis of 1836, 37, 38. They lose it. Okay, they have to get other people to break in with other monies to maintain it. So they are now no longer in control of the business, but they still have their hands in the pie. The two sons still work on that business for quite a long time. But they end up coming back. Okay. Benjamin Thomas Peebles marries a local woman, a Bleecker, also a good Dutch name. He stays in Albany. They have 5 children that I know of. Howard, okay, comes back after being down in New York City. He comes back, and in 1845 he buys a home in Rexford. That's a kind of a historic home. The 1795 Nathaniel Holmes home in Rexford. He buys that, and then basically properly calls the road Knott Road. So Knott Road in Rexford is actually not named after his father, but after him. And that is the end of my presentation.